1 year on in the war in Ukraine, Western allies are unwavering in their financial and military support. Yet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's not enough. I sat down with NATO Assistant Secretary General Baiba Braze at the Munich Security Conference to talk about how far NATO can go in supporting Kiev. I'm Sibel Karkush and this is One on One. NATO Assistant Secretary General Baiba Braze, thank you for joining us here on TRT World. I would like to start with the devastating earthquakes that have recently hit Türkiye. NATO allies and partners have been quick in providing great support to the relief efforts. Please tell us more.
First, thank you for having me, and our deepest condolences and sympathies to the people of Turkey, to the government, to everyone who has suffered in this horrible, horrible earthquake. For us at NATO, it was heartbreaking. It's the biggest natural disaster that has happened to NATO since its establishment. So everybody was touched and everybody tried to help. Staff have been donating as much as we can, and you saw there was, of course, Secretary General visited Türkiye and held meetings, but also visited the area to understand, because just looking at the map, it's not the same.
Here in Munich at the security conference, the main focus is, of course, the war in Ukraine. So Western allies have been ramping up their support from light to heavy weapons, combat tanks, and now possibly even fighter jets. But how far can NATO really go in supporting Ukraine, and not only to defend itself, but also to regain territory and without escalating the conflict further?
I think the important part is to underline that lethal aid is provided by allies. NATO is not part of the war. Russia has attacked Ukraine, violating UN Charter. NATO is a peace project for our populations, for people, almost 1 billion people, for all of us who are there. So we are based also on UN Charter, on the right to self-defense. So very clearly, NATO has said we have not been attacked. We are not part of the war. However, because this very basic rule, fundamental rule of international law has been violated by Russia, and it was called out by UN Secretary General, UN General Assembly. It was very clear that allies have to provide support to Ukraine. It's not only the right of Ukraine to self-defend, it's an obligation for all of us to support that international law that we have committed to. Otherwise, we are back to some jungle rules that whoever wants the peace of other country just goes and get it. So very clearly, allies committed help to Ukraine, and they coordinated outside NATO, so lethal aid is provided outside NATO. Within NATO, we provide non-lethal help, which is fuel, anti-drones, medical supplies, lots of things, enablers that are needed to not only sustain Ukraine's ability to fight, but also the will to fight. And there is not a single Ukrainian soldier on Russian territory, but there are thousands and thousands on Ukrainian territory. So, of course, supporting ability of Ukraine to push occupying forces, to push this aggressive force out, is our obligation, and we will stand by it as long as it takes to ensure that this precedent is not repeated elsewhere.
But Ambassador, let me ask, has NATO's deterrence strategy possibly failed? Because back in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. In 2014, we saw the annexation of Crimea, now the war in Ukraine. So apart from sanctions, where has the West really drawn a red line so that Russia would also fear real military resistance?
Again, there is a difference for NATO itself, because NATO is a collective defense organization. So the 30 countries that have decided to form NATO have said, if anyone attacks us, we stand for each other. NATO has not been attacked. So our deterrence is strong. The peace project that we are has ensured that our children, your generations, that we all can look to the future with reliance that NATO is there. However, of course, the security of our partners is important for us, and partners like Georgia, partners like Ukraine or Moldova or others. So, and not only we have been providing that support throughout the years to Georgia and Ukraine, training them like what Ukraine is able to do now in self-defense and successfully countering Russian aggression, even though being smaller country with smaller resources, clearly shows that the training provided by allies, the skills, the knowledge, and the ability to fight has been successful.
And do you see a chance for a diplomatic solution to this war?
I think the important part is to understand that successful negotiations are possible when the right conditions are there. The right conditions in this case will be there when Ukraine continues pushing Russia out. Only then Putin or anybody else will be ready or willing seriously to talk. We haven't seen any willingness from Putin to negotiate or sit down with President Zelensky and talk about the end of the war. And it's in the hands of Putin to stop that war. This is the unique situation. It's in the hands of one person. He can stop it in 5 minutes. He hasn't shown any readiness. Quite opposite, they're sending more people to die. They're failing. They haven't been able even to advance in the last few months anywhere. So they're being pushed back. So it's very clear that Ukraine needs to be successful, and that is what we are all committed to.
When addressing the Munich Security Conference, Ukraine's President Zelensky said there is no alternative to NATO membership. Do you consider to fast-track Ukraine's NATO bid in the next months, and or would that be giving false hopes?
The decision on Georgia and Ukraine joining NATO was made in 2008 in the summit in Bucharest. And that means that together with the decision in Bucharest that Ukraine will be a member of NATO in the future, plus this reaffirmation of its central role as a democratic independent country for the whole Euro-Atlantic security, forms a base for the future. First, the war has to be won. The war has to be really won in such a way that ensures that Ukraine is democratic and independent country, and that it's successful, that it governs its territory, and for that we need to provide all the support necessary.
How well is NATO now prepared for, let's say, threats of the future, let's say the rise of China, and also keeping in mind the downing of these Chinese spy balloons in North America?
NATO doesn't see China as a threat. What the strategic concept says is, of course, that China is we describe it as a challenge. However, also we clearly know that China's coercive behavior towards its neighbors, the violations of rights of its own minorities, its aggressive behavior in the information field, the cyber attacks, and the overall lack of transparency on its intentions while it's raising its military capabilities, the nuclear, the space, the conventional forces. They are increasing all the capabilities and not being transparent about why they are doing that. So the transparency, the genuine engagement is something that we would like to see from the Chinese side. So in that respect, that behavior raises concerns, and that's why NATO has indeed looked at also understanding China better, engaging with China. Secretary General has met the foreign minister, allies meet Chinese officials to make sure that there is that possibility of direct engagement, understanding, but in the same time also being clear that the rules-based international systems that we operate in, that Russia has violated, that it's also China's interest to maintain it and make sure that despite its sort of coercive behavior, that clearly China knows what we think about it.
Again, when it comes to NATO enlargement, regarding Finland and Sweden's bid to join the alliance, Turkey has been an indispensable and 70-year member of the alliance, and it is in principle agreeing with the enlargement and NATO's open door policy. But at the same time, it does have legitimate security concerns, especially in regards to Sweden's lax attitude towards what it says terror groups such as the PKK. So instead of, we see rising pressure on Ankara to greenlight these membership bids, but instead of maybe ignoring Turkey's concerns, should NATO members not also prioritize these security concerns that Ankara has?
We at NATO have said, of course, that Finland and Sweden will greatly contribute to NATO's core tasks and also to countering the two threats, both Russia and terrorism. And that concerns that Turkey has need to be addressed via these direct talks and conversations. The progress has been made, and again we expect that further progress will bring both countries into NATO with the help of Turkey, and that will be the alliance that is even stronger, better able to protect all of our populations and also our children and grandchildren.
Is there anything that NATO is doing actively to push Sweden to for concrete action against terror groups such as the PKK and to support Turkey in its fight against terror?
So the NATO's work on terrorism, again, those are the two main threats, Russia and the terrorism, that allies have decided. So when NATO is planning its operations, when NATO is planning its defense capabilities, readiness and so on and so forth, the threat of terrorism and how to counter it is integrated into everything that we do. So it's from everything. When you look at either hybrid threats or conventional operations, how we are planning exercises, terrorism, countering terrorism is always there. Then with regard to Turkey's legitimate concerns in the trilateral process, again, it's not happening via NATO directly, it's happening via direct talks. What we say is that, of course, we facilitate, we support the resolution of those talks, of those concerns that are there. And indeed, SecGen and other officials have had active conversations. But again, NATO is not the forum for those negotiations and talks.
Thank you, Ambassador Baiba Braze, for joining us on One on One.
You're most welcome, and it has been my pleasure to meet you.